some cell phone tower stuff, but that's all. All of that is like, I don't know. Maybe you guys cheated, kind of thing. It's crazy.
That's right.
What got you into this line of work of examining these? We're going to talk about, Mangione. We'll talk about Sirhan, Oswald, all these guys. But what got you into this in the first place?
I think it was the same interest you had. What you just explained. It was the curiosity into what makes these people tick, what makes them go off the deep end, and why they commit these particular crimes. So
Yeah.
I was in graduate school at Berkeley in the School of Criminology, and my major professor was the lead psychiatrist on the Sirhan case.
Mm.
So it really led to me being curious about why these people engage in these behaviors. And then 50 years later, I wrote a book on Sirhan, reanalyzing all the data and finding like in the JFK papers coming out now, I found lots of errors, omissions, problems, issues that both the prosecution and defense made during the trial. So that led to other inquiries, and then in my private patients, I've seen a lot of murderers, double murderers, etc. Kind of people that you were originally interested in, and it just worked its way into a career that spanned 5 decades. And at this point, then I just finished a book called Breakdown, which is on a comparison between Lee Harvey Oswald's mental state and Sirhan's mental state. I found that there's more similarities and dissimilarities in terms of their psychological composition. The findings in this book that'll be published, I think, in November. You never really know when a book's going to come out, but I think in November of this year with Trine Day Publishers that did my previous book. I think that the information that just came out on the JFK stuff is very interesting, but my books don't deal with the necessarily with the forensic facts or the whodunit thing. It deals with the psychiatry of these individual offenders. So if Oswald acted alone, or if there were accomplices, or how many people were stuffed on the grassy knoll, I mean, who really knows? But my evidence shows that Oswald and Sirhan really shared a lot of common psychiatric factors that really weren't diagnosed early in their careers.
So I had a guy on the show, his name is Paul Gregory. He was a professor.
Oh,
yeah. And so oddly enough, he's an economist, right? Okay, forget all of that.
Oh, yeah, no, he's brilliant.
Right. Russian immigrant parents. So they were part of the Russian mafia, if you want. Yeah. And I'm saying mafia, I mean, immigrants.
Yeah.
And for the audience, if you guys don't know that, I'll put a link for that episode up. But he's like, I interacted with Oswald across dinner tables. Yeah. And he's like, he was a dullard. He didn't have a command of English, and he got really offended when those things came out. And so, and I'm saying dullard, maybe he didn't see that, but he got very embarrassed at his shortcomings with his ability to write. And some of the letters that Paul received, he believes were from Oswald himself. And this is not a person, he doesn't attribute the murder, like any kind of conspiracy. He's like, this guy was crazy. He already took a crack at somebody else.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he talks about that instability, that mental instability that's there, that makes him, at best, a possible patsy and probably a guy who pulled the trigger.
Yeah, I mean, I use some of Paul Gregory's information in my new book, especially concerning his language impairment.
Yes.
That was really undiagnosed as a specialized learning disability. This contributed to his dyslexia. It contributed to his psychological confusion, to his inability to express himself, particularly in the written word. So Paul Gregory really does a great job, not psychologically because he's not a psychologist, but he does a great job in explaining what Oswald's written behavior, written words were like, and how many times it was like word salad, and there were hundreds of typos and words reverse misspellings that really, it wasn't Oswald's fault. He had a disability that at the time that he was first diagnosed, which was 1953, the skills weren't there to refine these kinds of learning and neurocognitive problems that I see as providing the foundation for his later psychopathic behavior and criminal behavior, which was strongly aided by his crazy mother, Marguerite, because Marguerite infused a lot of this antisocial behavior into her son that really came from her own, from within herself, and her own personal psychology that was marked by paranoia, suspiciousness of other people, her feeling downtrodden, that she was a victim of society. So she had a lot of baggage to carry it's called induced delusional disorder. You know, if you want to characterize it, it's called induced delusional disorder. So she kind of spread this pathology to her youngest son, and in doing so, created sort of a mental atmosphere where he was more prone to accept anti-establishment attitudes and act out. So this ties then into his learning disability, into his other kinds of psychopathologies, which led to his aggressive, assaultive behavior. As you point out, Oswald was accused of firing at Edmund Walker, and that was 7 months before this. He probably did that. He certainly expressed that guilt to Marina, his wife, that he was the person that shot at Walker, and then 7 months later, he's the accused assassin of the president of the United States. Now, as I said at the beginning, whether or not the new information coming out on the JFK tapes doesn't counter my argument, because none of that information is related to psychiatry or to a psychoanalysis of these two people, particularly of Oswald, who, as Paul Gregory said, in a non-diagnostic way, really had some upstairs issues.
Yeah. Well, I love that you read that book, because it's easy. There's so many books that you can read about it, but here's first account.
My book is a great companion to his book.
Which book is your book? Is
this is Breakdown? That's the new book published by Trine Day.
That's coming out maybe in November, right?
Maybe, yeah. Keep our fingers crossed. Maybe in November. we get all the details and the cover done and stuff. So. But I'm really glad you had that interview with Dr. Gregory, because he was a great source of anecdotal information that I kind of put together as a pattern to explain Oswald's specialized learning disorder. That's what he would be diagnosed with today. It's not just dyslexia. It goes further, because it weakens his connections to some extent to reality. It changes his ability to think, process information. So if you have a neurocognitive problem, an issue, that processing new information, such as the difference between right and wrong, becomes very vague.
I was wondering, so in my life right now, we've got someone that has a pretty bad case of dementia, but still have functioning, right? And so it's hard for them to, they do dementia things. And it occurs to us all the time that, we'll look at one another. It's my special someone. And then we'll say to each other, did I say this out loud to you? And because our brain is trying to remember things. And so we realize that there's a bandwidth where, like, if you dip below, if you go untreated and you lose a little bit of capacity, I'm not saying you get dementia, but it's that I don't know how wide that gap is between functioning and capable and completely detached. And in that gray zone, how dangerous is all of that middle spot? If it's 10%, is 5% for some okay,
Yeah.
and 5% for others? Like they disassociate, right? And that's my guess. How accurate is that reading that?
No,
Everybody's sort of close to a break at all times, depending on
yeah.
the stress and their health.
No, I think that's a good guess. The real issue is that once these undiagnosed conditions exist, then it kind of compounds itself. So it leads to other kinds of weakness in judgment, questioning your own viability, existential issues like who am I? So with Oswald and lots of cases like this, it really mutates into a kind of an overcompensatory behavior where you want to prove yourself that regardless of what these people say, I can't spell, I can't write, in his case, he couldn't do either in either Russian or English. So, I mean, he kind of flumocks both of those languages. So one reaction to that is overcompensation. That I'll show the world that I'm really somebody. So his one Marina kept constantly saying, or that he wanted to be a real man. She told the Warren Commission report that he wanted to assert himself to be an important person in American history. Well, he became an infamous person in American history, and my theory is that part of this is based on his loose neurocognitive processing that started very early in life when he really it was almost unfair because he couldn't interpret the same reality that everybody else did. Then he had the added influence of his mother's induced delusional disorder that really set him off the track and allowed him to have a susceptibility to violating rules, standards, mores of society.
Boy,
So,
yeah.
so what you say is true with the dementia patient. It's the same kind of thing where they're going to become angry. They'll reach out, grab things. I can do it. Don't worry about it. Even though they've been falling down, even though they can't remember anything.
Right.
So there's this overcompensation that they use, and this was certainly evident with Oswald.
Yeah. That's when you think about these things, and by the way, he's 24. And
He's
in his
24.
24 years, his adult years, not that many of them, he had experienced a lot of failure, a lot of fits and starts. Didn't work out in the Marines, went to Russia, fell in love with that idea, didn't work out, it's
That's
easy
right.
to
That's
see.
right. That's right.
Yeah. Someone that age might be like, well, there's nothing left for me, even though they've got decades ahead of them to figure something out. Who not everybody knows where they're going when they're 24,
Most people don't.
Yeah.
You and I probably didn't, but I mean,
No.
I was at Berkeley studying about Oswald at that time. So,
Right.
yeah, I kind of had some idea. With
Yeah.
with Oswald and some of these other killers, there's also the concept of self-sabotage. So with Oswald, he more or less, besides having his learning disability, besides having the negative impact of his mother, he also self-sabotaged himself. He violated rules. He got caught. He was as Paul Gregory might affirm, he was a compulsive liar in things where he would get caught and then later blamed. He shot himself when he was on a military base in Japan with a gun, dropped the gun, shot himself in the elbow. Another self-sabotaging situation, which goes to trying to answer the question, really, who am I and why can't I get anywhere? Well, you've got two things working against you. You've got your neurocognitive dysfunction, and you are doing things that make life miserable for yourself. So you're self-sabotaging your own behavior. You're getting court-martialed twice while he's in the Marines. Shot himself. Tried to commit suicide when he was in Russia. saved by his in-tourist helper that probably saved his life. So he's doing these self-destructive things, punishing himself for some kind of an original sin that probably subconsciously he feels that he has, but he doesn't know what the origin of it is.
The original sin idea, boy, I mean, that's something that you can, and for sure when you're 24, you can infect yourself with that. You just tattoo a 13 on your neck and just go crazy, because what's the difference? You're not going to ever have a life anyhow. You don't have to even be crazy or disassociative or have a neurodegenerative condition. That's just the chemicals of growing up.
Yeah, as I said, this overcompensation. The overcompensation stuff also fits with the Luigi Mangione pattern. That he was perceived himself as almost this illusionary, not delusional, because that's psychotic, but this illusionary zealot prophet that he was going to save the healthcare system. He was going to save humanity as this kind of effective altruist. And this effective altruism is you probably know what it is, but it's a current form of utilitarianism where people think that they and they alone can make the right moves that'll justify or equalize all the unfairness in society. So Mangione had this zealot-like zeal to change the world. And this is a common character trait now that I see with lots of these people. With Sam Bankman-Fried, the FTX guy. I mean, he had the same sort of philosophy that really went off the rails and led to this massive theft of billions of dollars from FTX and the Alameda investment company that he owned. Elizabeth Holmes, another one,
oh my gosh,
who I'm writing about. Very, very intriguing young lady, about the same age, by the way, as talking about Oswald and Sirhan, with this kind of effective altruism that, in an illusionary sense, only I can really change society. And I'll do this by making blood testing a free universal in the healthcare system, rather than charging $200 or $300 per blood draw. So she had the same kind of illusionary fantasies that she was really going to change things using this umbrella of effective altruism, the same principle that Mangione had currently, that he was going to change society. He was going to reverse what he saw as the power elite controlling society. So then he took his steps and justified his own behavior in his later manifesto, which is really kind of interesting, because that's very inculpatory. It's going to lead to the jury hearing him in his own words that he thought that the CEO of the healthcare company should be whacked. It's pretty detrimental to his defense.
Yeah, talk about testifying against yourself. I mean,
that's exactly right. I mean, the same thing happened in the Sirhan case, where he left this massive diary, RFK must die diary, in which he said that Robert Kennedy must die. I can't wait to kill him. I'll shoot him. So that was used against him without a search warrant, without any approval. It was introduced by the prosecution at his trial, and the defense team that I was close to, because I worked with the main psychiatrist in the case, the defense team said, "This sounds like a great idea. We will introduce not only a few passages from the diary, we'll introduce the whole diary." Well, what was the logic there? The defense logic was that if the jury could hear all of these, could read all of these writings, then they would know that he's crazy. Well,
Right.
it had a boomerang effect, and these statements were used to convict him, rather than explaining that, in essence, these statements were left by his alternate personality. Actually, he was a multiple personality at the time that he shot RFK. He left these messages to his primary personality to warn that personality what he was up to. Dr. Diamond, the chief psychiatrist, felt at the time that this was too confusing to the jury and they would think it was psychobabble, so he didn't introduce the concept of multiple personality.
Yeah. Do you think Sirhan pulled the trigger?
Yes.
Did he pull the only trigger?
Well, that's controversial also.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's the whole thing about the close contact shots from behind. And either that exists or it doesn't. And it's hard to determine which one of those things are true.
Yeah, as I said before, I'm not a ballistics expert.
Sure. Me neither.
So with the notion of a second shooter, of the security guard who allegedly drew his .38 caliber gun, Sirhan had a .22 with 8 shots in it, and it's alleged that the security guard, Thane Cesar, had his .38 and he fired a bullet into Kennedy's occipital area behind the ear from the back. So you go back and forth with these theories. Thomas Noguchi, the coroner at the time, he waffles through his whole book and doesn't know. At the end, he says, "I think it was just Sirhan." The evidence that has been adduced now stimulated Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to want to interview Thane Cesar. So Robert Kennedy Jr., the head of HHS now, he engages. Maybe, do you know this story?
No, tell it.
Okay, so I don't want to go over ground you already know.
No, we all want to hear it.
So he starts a dialogue with the security guard who may have shot his father. They go back and forth. The security guard was about 23 or 4 at the time. He was about 70 or so when RFK Jr. was talking to him. Security guard still lived down in your neighborhood, somewhere in Orange County. Kennedy's negotiating with him. The security guard says, "Yes, I'll give you the interview and the whole story," which obviously RFK Jr. wanted the story. Everybody wants the story.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'll do it on one condition, that you pay me $25,000. Kennedy, for some reason, balks at this, rather than getting his checkbook out and saying, "Here's a check, I'll meet you at the Holiday Inn on Wilshire Boulevard and we'll have a nice conversation and I'll pay for it." He balks at it. That's the end of the conversation with Thane Cesar, the security guard. The security guard then leaves the greater Los Angeles area, goes to Hawaii. Goes to the Philippines. And then he's dead.
Yeah.
So the story, it went to the grave with him. What was his participation? Was there any participation with him in the Ambassador Hotel on the night that Kennedy was shot? So these are trails that probably won't be followed very closely, right, because the information is so obscured. What's not obscured is the psychiatric information concerning what Oswald looked like, and
right,
the current thing I'm working on is obviously Mangione, not personally as his doctor, but as a diagnostician, using other kinds of information to try and piece together why this ordinarily bright, super intelligent, well-educated person from a great family would engage in this particular kind of homicidal behavior. So the defense team can't say that he was in Cleveland at the time. There's just overwhelming evidence that he pulled the trigger, but it leads to the question of why. And the second question, what was his psychological state when he actually pulled the trigger? Was he a rational person, or were there confounding, mitigating variables that impacted his reasoning and judgmental awareness at the time? And my answer to that is yes, he had certain kinds of psychological issues that impacted on his judgment.
When you see someone like Mangione who does this heinous thing, very calculating, very cold, is that person recoverable? Is there a redemption path? I mean, we've seen Hinckley get out after a long time, and with Sirhan, would he be a threat to society at his age that he is now? Or
Sirhan's almost 80. He's not going to kill anything except the fly on the window. I mean,
right.
No, he's not dangerous. I mean, that leads all kinds of controversy. Menendez brothers, are they dangerous? The issue of future dangerousness is one that nobody has a divining rod or a crystal ball. All you can do is to engage a person in a course of treatment to figure out what their and this is hard to do, what their subconscious reasoning was at the time they pulled the trigger. With Mangione, he was so imbued, and there's a lot of young people like this today. He was so imbued with his ideology, tourism, I call it, where you're trying to find one theory that explains everything. Well, this is why the world is wrong. This is why society is unfair. This is why the power elite, C. Wright Mills' stuff. This is why the power elite pushes around like we're on a pool table, we're billiard balls, and this will change things. So they have this ideology that they are zealots. They're the ones that can change it. With Mangione, he acquires this partially from Ted Kaczynski. So he carefully read Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, The Industrial State and its Future, where Kaczynski imbues himself with the same kind of ideology, that because he's against the advancement of society and science, and because he believes what H.G. Wells said in the Time Machine, that if I move forward, I'm going to find decadence, I'm going to find evil, I'm going to find bad things that are controlled by bad people. So this was Kaczynski's philosophy leading to his serial bombing. Move forward 30 years, and Mangione picks up on his theme that, maybe he was misinterpreted, maybe he was misunderstood. Maybe his words concerning revolution were really important for us to remember today.
You said a lot of adjectives as you talked about that stuff that I think are relative to a lot of people today. This is not a political statement. So if you feel like it is, just take yourself out of it and just listen to the words. Okay, so you said zealot, you said altruism. I would throw nostalgia in there. These are poisonous things. Where like a little bit of altruism is great, but to make that like a life goal, I always say like Utopia was a satire piece, and people who are utopians, we can make this world perfect.
Sure.
Go get a command of More, get a command of Erasmus, and then come back and tell me how that works out for you, because these things are poisonous, right? So a little bit of nostalgia, and probably like, I don't know when it is, but when you get in that lake and you swim across the nostalgia lake or the altruism lake, you get poisoned. That's just how it is.
Well, that's right. I mean, you're literally up the creek without a paddle, as the metaphor goes.
Yeah.
But with these people, then they develop this obsessional commitment to their own validity as trailblazers that they can justify everything that they do. So this ties into a Machiavellian sense that we can justify whatever means we use because the ends are legitimate. With Mangione, he has this whole crew of people on the internet who support him, who give him money. Mangione becomes a celebrity in the process, kind of a sad celebrity, really, because hopefully he didn't want this for himself, that he did it for, as you say, these pseudo altruistic, as I would call them, needs that he thought he was really going to change the healthcare system by murdering the CEO of United Healthcare. But he could have targeted anybody. He could have targeted the president of Kaiser Permanente, Blue Cross, Blue Shield.
Sure.
So he targeted the CEO of the biggest company because of his self-indoctrination. So my impression is that he became so imbued with this sense of social justice and I will be able to overcome the forces of an evil capitalistic society, and I'll take steps in that direction and eliminate a symbol of the problem, which is based on a neo-Marxist philosophy that society is not fair and it discriminates against its most disadvantaged.
Yeah. When you're someone who celebrates Mangione's stuff, whether you think he's handsome and has great abs, or like, I don't like that he murdered somebody, but I like that he murdered somebody. These folks, and again, this goes into one of these adjectives, like I'm an activist, and I think activism also is poisonous. Where like activists, this was Pete saying this, but they tend to not know when they've won, and so they just go and they're like, no, 0 is the goal, 0. Like, hey, easy. We got a little better. Let's pick a different thing that needs some help. But they can't. They just latch on and they become zealots. And I think that these things are synonymous, activism and zealots. They tend to, it's like, I don't know, Plato or somebody, like where you evolve to the next thing. Like right now you're an activist and now you're a zealot and you don't notice that you transition to this thing. And so when someone like Mangione, who's further up the scale, when he kills somebody, the zealots are like, yay! And you're thinking, oh my God, like how many people are capable of doing this and what prevents them from becoming the next Mangione?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. The point relates to absolutism. So when is it absolutely enough? And that we have made changes rather than engaging in a revolutionary act, and that's what Mangione, he endorsed Kaczynski's revolutionary aspect. So when is it time to stop and say we've made enough steps in the right direction that we don't have to resort to violence? So this is becoming a more common theme among these zealots that want to, for either political or social or economic or even religious reasons, probably more wars waged on religious reasons than any other reasons in history. But these people then, to keep with your point, they don't know when to stop, and that's the problem. The ordinary restraints stopping a person from, like Mangione, from printing a gun and then printing a silencer and then shooting the CEO is really a step too far. But he didn't realize this, so his subconscious behavior began to control his conscious reasons to not do something and allowed him to do it, which is kind of the Machiavellian sense that I am the one, and that gets into borderline delusional stuff. That's where Kaczynski was. that he was the one who was going to change society, that when his time machine was launched, he would find a perfect equalitarian society where everybody was the same. They had the same start points and the same end point. Well, that's communism, and that's where Mangione and the accolades that believe stuff like Kaczynski, that's what they believe.
Yeah, boy, there are certain pockets of people within every group, I imagine. Like in Muslims, there's these people that claim that they're the Mahdi, and they're like, I am the chosen one. Here I come, returning to bring on, the end of times. Is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Is this? Yeah, I mean, it's when you think about, and I'm thinking about Chinese Gordon and how he dies and out in Khartoum, but these folks delude themselves, but also a lot of people, where they think that this person is Jesus Christ. This is the Mahdi. This is, whoever it is. And again, like this is the same thing as though like the Ye Mangione people. Is it possible for them to come out of this? Humans like to gather. They like to become an occult. There's like a fine line between cult and a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the identity surrender that I assume that Mangione went through and Kaczynski did is similar to a cult-like surrender, where they become imbued with the sense of purpose, of a goal, which is almost like a religious second coming, where I am the chosen one, and that's where you get into the almost delusional context of I'm the only person that can change this, so I must take action. The second part is that it's curious to see the identification of certain people. Maybe they're kind of mentally challenged that identify with these kinds of people, and through history we see this all the time, that people are drawn to this kind of thing. That yes, free Luigi, free Mahmoud Kali, the guy from Colombia that was not a citizen and spewing this Hamas propaganda. Free him, free everybody, without really thinking through what their motives were and what would you do in the same situation.
Yeah. Would you bet your life that person is not going to commit another crime at that scale? And literally bet your life, like, if this person does this, you're vouching for them, you and that person will have to answer for it, but you're going to go first. Are you now ready to release that person? And that's a sobering thought, when you're actually betting your physical life.
Yeah, I think it's the sobering thought that Mangione's legal team is going to have to explore. So obviously they're going to have to come up with some variant of a psychiatric defense. Probably the most apropos or fitting psychiatric defense would be diminished capacity. And diminished capacity is what Dr. Diamond at Berkeley pioneered in the 1950s and 60s, and it was a doctrine that he tried to use with Sirhan, that saying that if you are insane, that doesn't mean you lack responsibility. If you're sane, it means you're totally responsible. So diminished capacity, as applies in New York state law, parcels out responsibility along a continuum. Maybe you're not 100% responsible and you're still sane, but you're not 100% non-responsible because you're insane. So somewhere along that continuum is a gradation or a rating of your mental state at the time you committed a crime. It's very necessary, even though the circumstances and facts of a case look pretty incriminating, such as with the Mangione case. It doesn't mean it meets the second and most important criteria in a crime, which is the mental state of the crime, called mens rea. The mental state the mental readiness to really know what you're doing beyond just knowing the difference between right and wrong. That your judgment was so vitiated, changed, altered, and modified that something was different about your behavior from the ordinary rational person that wouldn't take a gun and shoot the president or the CEO of a healthcare company.
Right. Yeah. When Koberger, who goes back to the crime scene, before it's a crime scene, when he's contemplating, he's got the die in his hand and he's trying to not throw it across the river, or maybe he's trying to throw it across the river and has it, whatever side he's on, is he fighting for the good, or is he, desperately trying to actually make the bad decision? When Mangione finally decides to raise his arm, these are moments where like other people step back in those preceding steps.
Yeah, that's right.
They go,
sure.
Is there any idea like what percentage of the people raise their arm as opposed to, I'm fucking crazy, I'm not doing that, I'm going to go live my life. Why do I care? The brink. How many people walk back from and even brink adjacent? How many people walk back from that?
Yeah, but it depends on how impactful these subtle messages are and how susceptible you are to accepting them, that you're special, that you are the savior, that you're the ideologue that is capable of changing things. Once you start to accept that and you run it through your own neurocognitive processing, then you can justify almost any behavior, whether it's stealing $800 million, like Elizabeth Holmes did with Theranos, or
Right.
whether it's Mangione trying to, in a Machiavellian way, justify his behavior, that this is best for society. So it's a whole different ideological appeal to what I call the ideology tourist concept. These people are searching for something that will unify their lives, draw together all the loose ends, that at the end of the day, they can say, aha, this is the reason that society is so unfair. This is the reason that they're still using capital punishment. This is the reason that there's still poverty. Whatever it's a fill in the blank theory.
Yeah.
At the end of the sentence, you fill in the blank and fill in your own pet project to be justified, regardless of what the means were. So with Mangione, when he talks about Kaczynski's manifesto, he said, well, yes, maybe Kaczynski was right that revolution is the way to go. Well, the first step in revolution is to pick up arms and go after the perceived enemy. So there's a paranoia concept in what Mangione did. He's bombarded by these particular messages. He's overcompensating to try and stand out and be this semi-political economic figure in society. And above all, he thinks might is right, that he has the answers. So there's also this narcissistic phenomenon that I'm the chosen one. That's pure narcissism. That you level all the counter arguments, and you only accept those that are consistent with your viewpoint. So that's narcissist. Can't accept criticism, always are right. They have the right picture of society, of the world, of their worldview, and nobody can challenge it. That's Mangione. So I think that his defense team, when they hire the right psychiatric team, that they're going to have to approach his case from a standpoint of diminished capacity or other quasi psychiatric defense that doesn't involve the psychotic experience.
Yeah, boy. I've been thinking about, there's a couple things I've been thinking about, and you brought up Mons Rea, and I think it's important to, I love etymology, so this is a Latin phrase. And
yes.
I guess to just really loosely transliterate it, it means like, what's he really thinking? like where his state of mind is what it means, right? And so where is it, in terms of how guilty is he, and how absolved of guilty is he, right?
That's
and
right.
I always thought of it as being linear, but really you're talking about something that's more spherical. We're like, yeah, this one crazy. He's for sure, guilty, almost 100%. But, and so that changes my way of thinking about it. So I wanted to put that in there, but also thinking about he shoots this guy in the back and maybe target of opportunity, but it's colder to say, hey, CEO guy, and then turn him around and then whack him face to face. There's something in there. Is that any part of the defense? Like, has he got an internal struggle he can show? Why does he shoot a guy in the back? Or is that worse because he's like, I don't even care. It's that I don't even care if they know. What are your thoughts on that? Did you freeze? Or are you thinking? I think you froze. Right at the big question. All right. Hopefully John will pop back in. How funny was that? I thought he was thinking for a second there. Hey, everybody. It's PD Turner from the Break It Down show. Hey, there you are. Are you coming back?
That circumstantial issue that he couldn't face to face, couldn't look him in the eye situation to the real notion of why did he do it? What were the psychological drivers that forced him or compelled him into this situation where of import is the fact that his escape was probably, limited. Even though he fled to Pennsylvania, he probably knew that his escape was not going to happen. That his apprehension would be imminent. So there again, maybe he has and then he leaves this diary after his arrest. He leaves the 6 pages, 262 words, whatever it is. So maybe he has part of this masochistic self-sabotage behavior that Oswald had. The same thing. He's leaving a breadcrumb trail to himself. He's self-sabotaging his behavior, which may be a sign of kind of a subconscious appeal to his own guilt.
Yeah. Man, I don't want to get too far just like the psychology thing, because now you got me thinking about, right. There's an internal struggle. Yeah, it's interesting. By the way, you froze up right when I asked that question, and so I missed the first part of it. But I guess we'll just get back to that another time. So, when we think about, did you have anything to say on Montserrat and like talking about it in terms of being less on a spectrum and more like a spherical thing? Does that make sense at all, or no?
Yeah, I think so, because our entire life is based on our judgments, collective judgments every day. If something interrupts that rational process and leads to a criminal indictment such as Mangione, then that becomes a factor that plays into his defense, because he really has no other defense. If that happens, then he's facing 1 first-degree murder charge, 2 second-degree murder charges, and then assorted weapons violations in New York. He's also facing the death penalty with a federal charge, and then he's facing lesser charges in Pennsylvania. With the 3 murder charges in New York, the prosecution has to establish that his mental state was such that he could rationally appreciate and judge his awareness at the time of the crime. The defense's situation, the defense's position, using diminished capacity, might be, I mean, I don't know, I'm not speaking from his expert defense counsel, but might be that because of mental duress, because of these other factors, because of this occult like surrender that you bring up, that he is less responsible for his behavior than a person that didn't have these factors evident, which could reduce the charges to perhaps first-degree manslaughter and then lead to a plea bargain that would be 15 to life, and he could be out in 15 years, rather than having a life sentence or 40 years in prison. So I think that the defense has to work around some amenable defense strategy that will allow them to vitiate the first and second degree murder charges to a lower charge and then plead out.
Yeah. I'm not really for the death penalty, except for when I am. And this is one of those cases where I think it's, like if it's there's so many times when I'm just not comfortable with it. And there are too many times when DNA exonerates somebody, even if there's chicanery in the DNA evidence.
Right.
But like the guy that, I'm not even gonna say the guy's name, but the guy that hooked up a black dude to his truck and drove him to death back in, I think it was the 90s. That guy got executed and nobody had a problem with that. The same night, there was a candlelight vigil for another guy who was going to set to be executed, I think in Tennessee. And this is like that dichotomy of like, for sure, death penalty warranted. This other one, gosh, we're just not sure.
Right.
But I think Mangione falls into, without having the trial and presuming innocence and all that, I think it's appropriate that he has that charge hanging over his head. And I guess with that, I would say this. I did a whole series of shows on people that had committed murder and other life in prison kinds of crimes.
Yeah.
And San Quentin is particularly good at rehabbing people professionally. And the people that who aren't criminals who go in there to work with these guys, a number of them said, these are the most well-adjusted people I've ever met. These are young folks, so they don't know everybody in the world, but they work in the startup world. They're like, everybody else here is on Adderall. They're crazy.
Yeah.
And these guys that have been forced to deal with, not all of them, but the ones that they were encountering, forced to deal with their crimes. And I've interviewed these guys too. You're like, this is a very rational, sane person that I would imagine is never going to harm anybody again. They put themselves in a situation. And one of the smartest things I heard was a guy named Shaka Senghor. He's like, I didn't know any murderers in prison. I knew people that had killed people, but these were murderers. These were people that had a violent thing, had this horrible upbringing, and it resulted in this violence. And he had said, prison was an extension of our community. Well, if prison is an extension of your community, some violence is going to be in your community all the time. And this thing damages people. So I think about that with someone like Mangione or Sirhan. And I wonder, like, can you, behavioral therapy yourself into a place where society could reliably trust someone who does something so heinous, so over the top in terms of sensationalism of the target, but also the action, the murder.
Yeah, I think that that's a lot to unpack there. That in the states that have capital punishment, they have a higher murder rate than the abolition states that have outlawed capital punishment. So that's kind of an interesting piece of information. There is some information where some people will gravitate towards a capital punishment state. They'll commit a homicide because they want to commit suicide themselves, but they can't. So they do a state-ordered killing of themselves. And I saw several cases like that when I was at Berkeley. With the irreversibility or the change of these people, the difficulty is that you have to reach into their subconscious in order to extract the information. This is what Dr. Diamond tried to do with Sirhan, is that he hypnotized him many times. He tried to induce the second personality, which was really responsible for the murder, and not exculpate, but to just explain to the innocent first personality what had happened. So I think you'd have to go through a very intriguing probing of a person's subconscious in order to fit the pieces together. I don't think that Mangione has a clue of these factors that we're discussing here today. The recent research with psychedelics, particularly with psilocybin, I think offers some real promise to creating very rapid insight into a person's unconscious behavior that could include their motives and their decision making leading to the commission of a crime. This obviously was started, quite a while ago with Timothy Leary in the LSD studies in Massachusetts prison, where he claims that, and I heard him speak to say this, he claims that there was great insight induced into criminals' behavior to reduce their recidivism and their impulses to do bad things after they had been guided through LSD trips. The psilocybin research now, I think, is really uncovering a lot of information that could be used as a prophylaxis, as a way to insulate and change people and get to their real motives. I think you had a great experience of interviewing those people at San Quentin. I taught a few classes at San Quentin. I taught basic to the correctional officers at San Quentin, but in essence, I interacted with a lot of inmates too. And at that time, I didn't have the same training and understanding of how you can reach these people. But I think with a psychedelic approach, along with guided imagery and an implosive therapy, where they realize and go back to the scene of the crime and realize that their justifications for this were really based on erroneous material that they told themselves, that I think you could go a long way towards rehabilitation of these people. With Eric and Lyle Menendez, there you got a great case where you've got Governor Newsom that's struggling with this. There's no question. He took on a lot by trying to evaluate the future dangerousness of these two brothers, who probably are political prisoners at this point after 35 years of being incarcerated. That maybe this kind of an approach where they would have to confront. You can't avoid the drama of the and the impact of the murder incident on their own subconscious behavior. So I think if a taped psychedelic interview or a series of interviews would be conducted to get them to realize the immorality and illegality of what they did against their parents, regardless of what their reasoning was. Sexual molestation, I couldn't drive the Ferrari, you wouldn't give me this. They were kind of spoiled brats, in a sense, and then they came up with this sexual abuse excuse situation. But I think they would be good candidates for this prospective psychedelic analysis, where people could, with experience, could probe them further and get them to realize what they did was basically wrong. It wasn't right. It wasn't Machiavellian. It didn't justify anything. It was wrong.
Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah. The pay scale's right, so sure.
Ken Bianchi, eligible to be considered for parole this year. Here's a guy who faked, according to what we know right now, faked his split personality disorder. So what are your thoughts on Ken Bianchi? And if he gets in front of that parole board, I mean, how on earth does that guy get out? Is it even possible? Why do we even...
Okay,
he has to,
look, you got to have me back, Pete, to talk about the Bianchi case, because I've written about that in my new book, Breakdown. Where
let's save it.
Very, very interesting person who was controlled with this induced delusional disorder through many, many years of not brainwashing, but of encouraging his psychopathic sexual deviance. So, but there's a whole thing, plus the intervention of Vera Lynn, the third person in the party that was going to prove that Bianchi was not guilty, because there was another trailside murder committed in in Spokane. It's a very intriguing story.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to that.
You know about Vera Lynn, right?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah. All this stuff is fascinating to me. So it's, well, so your book is in the, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying you are very well read in this area. You know, you should have pursued your credentials in forensic psychology, and I would have hired you as an assistant.
Oh man, is it my command of Latin that's crappy?
No.
Well, thank you for the compliment.
Cogito ergo sum.
Yeah. So well, in growing up in the shadow of these Zodiac killings, you know, I mean, from my back window to the killing in December of '68 or whatever that was, that's a mile and a half of open field, you know, and that road, we would hang out on that road all the time, doing things, scaring each other, all kind of stuff. And so when you are by a historic place like that, and just around the corner, not even a mile away from that, is the Blue Rock Springs killings. Yeah. And we all went to Berryessa. So, you know, I mean, I've been on that intersection where Paul Stein gets shot, not because I was trying to be there, just because of day-to-day stuff, right? And so these things, if they fascinate you, and it's not like I'm hunting these things, I was around it. And you know, it's interesting. So, well, let's wrap it up. I want to have you back on for sure. I also want to talk about the connection between our quantum entanglement, because we, you know, as we learn more from science that we have less free will than we imagined, maybe there's something with that too. So I'd like to talk about that in the future. Everybody go to, let me take down the Paul Gregory thing. Let me put your book up here. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. You can go to there's the DNA cold case book. You guys know what I say, buy two and buddy read. There's the website. That's where all the resources are. And we're going to have John back real soon. I thank you for coming on the show, man. Really fascinating. We could talk easily for 2 more hours, but we got to let each other go and have lunch.
Absolutely. So, and also those books are available on TrineDayPublishers.com.
TrineDay Publishers.
So thanks for the very inquisitive questions and interview. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, likewise. All right, hang on. I'll come back and say goodbye to everybody else. I'll see you.